Another slightly offhand remark before I begin. This is going to be a paper that's a little bit like John's paper in that it's going to be more about Kierkegaardian ideas and Kierkegaardian problems than careful Kierkegaard exegesis. I'll leave the careful exegesis to Joachim and people who are better suited to that sort of thing than myself. Anyway, 1. Kierkegaard's therapeutic project. Kierkegaard's project is, first and foremost, a therapeutic one. Although he makes theological points and defends philosophical theses, as Eleanor is at pains to point out to us, he's not primarily a theologian or a philosopher. Instead, he's a physician of the soul. His aim is to help us get better, existentially speaking, to cure us of our spiritual ills. And what Kierkegaard thinks we need to help us overcome the anxiety and despair that plague our lives is a transformation. We've got to turn our backs on the goal of self-gratification that so many of us embrace. We've got to devote ourselves to God and the good rather than to ourselves. In some, Kierkegaard's prescription for our existential ailments is that we leave behind the aesthetic life and turn in an ethical or religious direction. The central question facing Kierkegaard is thus a practical one. How can he inspire these kind of transformations? How can he get us, his readers, to change who we are at a fundamental level? Following Ryan Kemp and some others, I'm going to argue that reason is not the proper tool for this task. No mere argument, even if cogent or sound, can move people in the way that Kierkegaard wants to move them. Yet, I'll maintain that where reason fails, art can succeed. Indeed, to the degree that Kierkegaard ever inspires transformations, it's in virtue of the beauty of his words and the aesthetic appeal of his stories, rather than the force of his logic. 2. Transformational change. Appreciating the depths of Kierkegaard's practical problem requires understanding the kind of change that he wants to bring about. His goal is to inspire what he refers to as qualitative changes, but that in the literature today are often called transformations. Transformations have 2 parts. First, they involve a shift in our desires, preferences, and values. In a transformation, we come to care about something we didn't previously care about. Second, transformations involve a shift in our epistemic standpoint. In a transformation, we enter a new way of seeing the world, one we did not and couldn't have understood beforehand. So, classic examples of transformations include getting married, deciding to become a parent, starting a new career, enlisting in the military. But it's often said that religious conversions are paradigm cases of transformations, and I'll return to that point in a moment. Many of the changes that we make in our lives have obvious justifications. They serve goals that we already embrace or provide benefits that we already care about. So, we might give up social work to become a lawyer, for instance, because we want to make enough money to buy our dream house. Or we might start volunteering at that local food pantry because we want to impress the college admissions committees. Transformations are supposed to be different in this regard. They defy easy or obvious rational justifications. And there are 2 reasons why. First, because transformational changes involve a shift in our epistemic standpoint, we don't know what we're getting ourselves into when making them. The world is going to look different to us on the other side of the transformation. We're going to see details and make connections that we currently can't. And we'll also recognize and engage with values that are just opaque to us right now. So, as a result, it's impossible to know what it will look and feel like for us to embody this new way of life, and so it's impossible for us to know whether this new way of life is going to appeal to us. This is what I call the cognitive hurdle to transformation. Second problem. Suppose we could see what life would be like for us on the other side of a transformation. Suppose we could identify the benefits that this new way of life has to offer us. The further problem is that these benefits answer to a set of cares and desires that we don't currently possess. So they're not going to gain traction with our hearts and minds as they're currently constituted. This is what I'll call the conative hurdle to transformation. It requires coming to care about things that we don't care about right now. Example. To illustrate the problem, consider the case of Marge, a music appreciation teacher who wants to inspire her students to love classical music, roughly modeled on my mother. At present, Marge is frustrated, as Marge always is. Most of her students don't do their homework, or if they do, it's for the wrong reasons. They complete their lessons to earn good grades, and not because they care about the music for its own sake. Of course, part of the problem is that classical music is really complicated. It takes training to understand the subtleties of counterpoint. Thus, Marge can talk about how rewarding it is to listen to classical music, but novices, like her students, aren't in a position to perceive these rewards for themselves. The other part of the problem is that the preferences of her students point in the wrong directions. Because of their upbringing or the influence of their friends, they only like rock or rap music. So even if Marge could teach her students to hear what's enjoyable about classical music, it wouldn't appeal to them as they're constituted right now. 3. The transition between spheres of existence. One of my main claims is that the transition between Kierkegaard's spheres of existence, particularly the move from the aesthetic to the ethical or religious, that transition has the structure of a transformation. First, it involves a shift in our core desires, preferences, and values. Entering into the ethical or religious life is a matter of coming to care about God or the good rather than ourselves. Moreover, it's a matter of coming to care about these things for their own sake and not because of other benefits they might give us. Second, the transition to the ethical or religious life involves embracing a new point of view, one that's inaccessible to us beforehand. This actually reflects a deep truth about human existence for Kierkegaard. Only someone who embraces a given life view can grasp it. Like is understood only by like, as he repeatedly says. Kierkegaard emphasizes this point when it comes to religion. He writes in his journals that things look different through the eyes of faith. Believers see things that non-believers can't. And in For Self-Examination, he adds that the Christian's worldview is incomprehensible to outsiders. Thus, one of my other theses is that Kierkegaard faces the same obstacles as Marge. For simplicity, let's focus on the religious case. Because Kierkegaard's readers aren't yet religious, they don't know what it would be like to be religious. So Kierkegaard can sing the praises of the God relationship all he wants. He can talk about how knights of faith experience peace and comfort in their ability to find God everywhere, as Rick Furtak talks about in some of his work. But Kierkegaard's readers aren't in a position to see these purported benefits for themselves. So they can't say whether they'd find the religious life as appealing as Kierkegaard does if they experienced it firsthand. That's the cognitive hurdle. In addition, even if Kierkegaard could get his readers to see for themselves the value of the religious life, it still wouldn't motivate them to become religious. For at present, Kierkegaard's readers don't have an affinity for spiritual goods. Their tastes are for earthly matters. In other words, as Kierkegaard often attests, their problem isn't just a lack of knowledge. It isn't just that they don't know what they're missing. It's also that their desires and preferences are out of whack. They're not oriented in the right way. They don't currently want what the religious life has to offer. This is the conative hurdle to motivating religious conversions. 4, the imagination solution. These kind of considerations have led to commentators in a couple of different directions. One response has been to follow Alistair MacIntyre and interpret Kierkegaard as saying that the transition to the religious sphere involves some kind of irrational leap. Through sheer force of will, we've got to make ourselves believe what we lack reason to believe. Of course, you all know that this reading of Kierkegaard is controversial, but there are some texts that seem to suggest it. Postscript sometimes gives the impression that religion is a matter of passion rather than understanding. Fear and Trembling talks about how the movement of faith is made by virtue of the absurd. And there are journal entries where Kierkegaard says that the kind of commitment to God that he cares about can't be based on reasons. Another response has been to interpret Kierkegaard as a kind of Calvinist. On this view, Kierkegaard holds that the religious life isn't something that we choose, it's something that God chooses for us. We don't transform ourselves, we are transformed by a higher power. So we just don't need to be provided with any kind of rational justification. This interpretation also enjoys some textual support. In Philosophical Fragments, Climacus paints a picture of Christianity according to which God does absolutely everything for the believer. And the idea that we can do nothing without God is one that we find throughout Kierkegaard's writings. I don't want to dismiss either of these readings. I think each of them captures some aspect of Kierkegaard's authorship, and I'm not sure that we can kind of wrangle Kierkegaard's authorship into some kind of coherent system. My problem is that neither of these readings addresses what I take to be the primary question facing Kierkegaard. Neither of them explains what is Kierkegaard's role supposed to be as our existential therapist. If God does absolutely everything, what's left for him to do? Or if the movement of faith is just some kind of irrational leap, why does Kierkegaard write thousands and thousands of pages trying to guide us through the process? So fortunately, a number of scholars, including some of you, have tried to develop interpretations of Kierkegaard that avoid the extremes of Calvinism and McIntyreanism. The most promising of these are those that assign a central role to the imagination. And it's easy to see the appeal of this kind of approach. In Sickness, we read that the function of our imaginations is to provide us with an image of our higher selves. And it's natural to think that some kind of vision of our higher selves might draw us to those selves. Seeing who we might become can motivate us to take the steps to actually become that kind of person. And then the role for Kierkegaard here is going to be obvious. His task is to inspire our imaginations, to help us envision our higher, transformed selves. And indeed, that's what we get in his writings. The characters he creates disclose ways that we could live. But how exactly is this story supposed to work? How can our imaginations, aided by Kierkegaard's literary art or otherwise, do what reason can't? How can they overcome the cognitive and conative hurdles that I've been describing? Those are the questions I'm going to try to answer in the rest of my talk. So, 5, the cognitive obstacle. I said before that Kierkegaard posits a qualitative divide between the spheres of existence. This seems to entail that only someone who occupies a given sphere can know what it's like to occupy that sphere. Only the Christian can know what it's like to be a Christian, Climacus says, and mutatis mutandis for absolutely every stage of existence. But taken at face value, this point spells disaster for Kierkegaard's project. If I can't know what it would be like for me to be religious prior to becoming religious, then I can't know what I'm getting myself into by choosing the religious life. And if I can't know what I'm getting myself into by choosing the religious life, then I can't take ownership over this choice. I can't self-consciously endorse it as reflecting my own values and beliefs. And I think this is what Anticlimacus is getting at when he says that the imagination is the capacity instar omnium, the capacity for all capacities. We're capable of willing something in the sense of deliberately choosing it, only if we're capable of imagining it. So, if Kierkegaard thinks the religious life is something we can deliberately choose, then he's got to allow that we can imagine it. Of course, to say that we can imagine what it would be like to be religious prior to actually becoming religious isn't to say that we can do so perfectly, and it isn't to say that we can do so without assistance. I think this is how we can accommodate Kierkegaard's claim that there's a qualitative divide between the spheres. We can read him as holding that if we're not religious ourselves, we need help from the other side. We need someone who already embraces the religious life to describe it for us, or God to reveal it to us. In addition, even with outside assistance, we can at best see the religious life as through a glass darkly. The clarity of face-to-face vision is only going to come with an actual conversion. Kierkegaard often emphasizes God's role here, playing up humanity's need for revelation, but this doesn't rule out a role for Kierkegaard himself. Not that he ever received a divine revelation, he denies that, but his writings convey the same revelation found in the Bible. They're another expression for that way of life described in that old familiar text, he says. Climacus elaborates on this point by saying that Kierkegaard's writings give us another picture of religious inwardness. They communicate to us imperfectly what it looks and feels like to occupy the religious sphere. I think this is what makes Fear and Trembling so great. Reading it gives us a glimpse into the inner mental life of Abraham, that father of faith, as he struggles to fulfill God's commands. 6, the conative obstacle. This is where I take Eleanor to task. It's sometimes tempting to think, as I worry that Eleanor succumbs to, that overcoming the cognitive hurdle should be enough. If only Kierkegaard could provide his readers with an accurate vision of the higher life. If only he could get us to see the religious life for what it really is, they'd want to pursue it. So Kierkegaard's therapeutic task is simply a clarificatory one. All he needs to do is to make our possibilities clear to us. But this can't be right. And Kierkegaard rejects the Socratic view that what holds us back is just ignorance. Our problem, he says, isn't just a lack of knowledge, it's also a lack of passion. In other words, as Kierkegaard sees it, our cares and desires are out of whack. We don't want the right kind of things. In particular, we're not favorably disposed to the religious life. The benefits that religion has to offer don't appeal to us as we're constituted right now. So if Kierkegaard wants to inspire us to become religious, he's got to do more than some kind of clarification of the religious life. In sum, as I said before, Kierkegaard is in the same situation as Marge. Because Marge's students don't currently care about the value of classical music, showing them the value of classical music isn't going to get them to do their homework. When discussing a related version of this example, Agnes Callard, in her great book Aspiration, I encourage you all to read it, it's great. Agnes Callard concludes that only something extrinsic to classical music is going to do the trick. Only the promise of some reward or the fear of some punishment is going to move students to do their work. Moreover, the extrinsic motivation has got to be something that speaks to the students' current desires and cares. The extrinsic motivation can't presuppose that they have more developed cares than they actually do. In addition, Callard observes, extrinsic motivations aren't actually enough. They're not going to carry the students all the way through the transformation, all the way to the end state of caring about classical music for its own sake. So, the extrinsic motivations that pull the students forward have to have a provisional status, or she calls it a proleptic status. Their purpose has got to be to get students to engage with classical music long enough and seriously enough that they come to appreciate it for its own sake. In other words, the teacher has got to hope, Marge has got to hope that listening to classical music, even if for the wrong reasons, is going to have a transformative effect on the students. It's going to change their preferences so that they align with what classical music has to offer. Well, $1 million question, how is that transformation supposed to happen? How are the students supposed to shift from caring about classical music for extrinsic reasons, like grades, to caring about it for its own sake? Satisfying answers here are elusive. But it helps to see that the puzzle isn't new or unique to the kind of cases that I'm talking about. What's at stake is really the question of how habituation works. We know that our brains are hardwired to like what we repeatedly do. The more we engage in a behavior, the more that we tend to enjoy it. What remains unclear is how or why that happens. And I know that there's a bunch of scientific theories on offer to explain habituation, but I'm going to save adjudication of them for some other time. For now, it's going to have to satisfy you for me to say that this phenomenon occurs regularly in a lot of places in life, so I'm not particularly embarrassed by relying on it here. 7. Kierkegaard on extrinsic motivation. On my view, Kierkegaard accepts a version of Callard's theory. But this might seem wrong to you. And that's like one of my main claims, that Kierkegaard accepts a version of Callard's view. But this just might seem wrong because Callard relies on extrinsic motivations, and Kierkegaard often finds extrinsic motivation objectionable. In Upbuilding Discourses in Various Spirits, he accuses the person who wills the good for the sake of the reward of lacking purity of heart. In Christian Discourses, he criticizes those who obey God because of what they'll get out of it for breaking that injunction against serving two masters. Yet, I think these kind of passages tell only one side of the story. In a number of other texts, either Kierkegaard or one of his pseudonyms touts the extrinsic benefits of morality, religion, or Christianity in particular. In either or, Judge William praises the ethical life because it provides a way out of despair. And Anticlimacus makes a similar point about religion. In addition, both Climacus and Kierkegaard speak about Christianity's promise of eternal happiness in a way that sounds like Pascal. Climacus goes so far as to say that an interest in eternal happiness is what attracts people to Christianity in the first place. So, Kierkegaard's of two minds about extrinsic motivations. Sometimes he seems for them, other times against them. I think we can resolve this tension by attributing to him a version of Callard's view. On the one hand, Kierkegaard regards extrinsic motivation as crucial for jump-starting the transformation process. Extrinsic motivations attract the attention of people who don't already care about God or the good, getting them to take those things seriously and to engage with them in a preliminary way. On the other hand, Kierkegaard believes that we got to move beyond extrinsic motivations. They're just a ladder where to climb up, but eventually kick away. Less prosaically, extrinsic motivations get us to engage with God and the good long enough and intimately enough that we come to care about them for their own sake. 8. Art as inspiration. I said that this paper had to do with the transformative power of art. You might think, like, well, where's the art in all of this? I said earlier that art can give us a vision of our possibilities. It can help us see what it would be like to live differently than we currently do. But art also draws us to our possibilities. It inspires us to leave behind the old versions of ourselves. In short, art can help us overcome the conative hurdle to transformation. One way art inspires us is by giving us aesthetically appealing images of our possibilities. An artist may describe some new way of life we could adopt with beautiful words or depict it with striking visual forms. An artist may embed this new way of life in a gripping narrative or have it embodied by a charming character. The result is that we feel pleasure upon viewing, hearing, or reading about this possible life. And this pleasure draws us in. It captivates our hearts and our minds. It pulls us toward the new way of life in such a way that we find ourselves wanting to embody it. This is beauty's great power. It makes us want to repeat what we see. Of course, when it comes to transformations, the hope is that we'll eventually stop needing the pull of beauty. We'll engage with the new way of life long enough and deeply enough that we come to care about it for its own sake. In other words, the hope is that aesthetic pleasure we experience when perceiving the beautiful representations of the new life will function like rewards, punishments, and other extrinsic motivations. Beauty is a ladder we climb up, but ultimately kick away. 9. Kierkegaard's use of art. One of my major claims in this paper is that Kierkegaard wants to use art in the way I just described. He wants to use art as a means to inspire transformations. Initial evidence isn't hard to come by. In Point of View, Kierkegaard says that he's got to begin where his readers are. When trying to motivate people to change their lives, he can't assume they have cares that they lack. He's got to speak to desires that they actually possess. And Kierkegaard also observes that his target audience, well, they have aesthetic interests. They live their lives in aesthetic categories and in pursuit of aesthetic ends. So if Kierkegaard wants to reach people, his writing style has got to appeal to people's aesthetic interests. He's got to give them something beautiful and brilliant. Yet, in something that's a trouble spot for my interpretation, Kierkegaard places limits on his use of aesthetics. It's permissible, he says in Point of View, to rely on beauty to capture people's attention and make them aware of their possibilities. But it's unacceptable to use aesthetics to push or to pull people towards any option in particular. And we find that same restriction in Postscript. Kierkegaard says, aesthetics to attract people's attention, okay. But beyond that, people have got to be allowed to go their own way without outside influence. And he specifically objects to using aesthetics to inspire people to become religious. The depth of Kierkegaard's worries about aesthetics becomes apparent in that journal entry where he says that Jesus had to be ugly. Not only did the Son of God have to lack money and worldly power, but like Socrates, he had to lack physical beauty. Kierkegaard extends this line of thinking in Adler. To ensure that people aren't attracted to religion for the wrong reasons, all true apostles got to make themselves look repugnant. They've got to forego finely tailored clothing and handsome appearances, and ideally, and here I fare nicely, they won't even have sonorous voices. In sum, it seems Kierkegaard wants things set up so people become religious for the right reasons or not at all. One of my main claims is that this kind of insistence on motivational purity is misguided. Think about Marge. If she removes all possible wrong reasons from the table to ensure that her students only do their homework for the right reasons, you know what the result is going to be? They're not going to do their homework. For Marge's students don't care enough about classical music to do their homework for the right reasons, for its own sake. Prior to taking her class, they're not interested in what classical music has to offer. So her students need some kind of wrong reasons to get started. They need a reward, like grades or chocolate, or a punishment, like Marge yelling at them, to drive them forward. In fact, demanding that people have pure motivations at the outset, that violates Kierkegaard's rule of starting where people are. There's a part of Kierkegaard that would appreciate this point. It fits his rule about beginning where people are. It also reflects his actual practice. His accounts and descriptions of the religious life, they're not ugly, they're not aesthetically repugnant, they're beautiful, striking, witty, humorous. In Fear and Trembling, the lyrical brilliance of Silencio's speech in praise of Abraham mirrors his admiration for the father of faith. Same thing holds about discourses dedicated to the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. The language Kierkegaard uses to describe these two metaphors possesses a kind of sublime elegance. Finally, think of works of love. Along with Fear and Trembling, it may be the text that's inspired the most readers. But what draws people to works of love isn't just what Kierkegaard says, but how he says it. It's the aesthetic appeal of Kierkegaard's literary style that's the primary engine of the work's transformative power. So, final couple of remarks here. So, in sum, on my account, art stands at the center of Kierkegaard's project. It's the means by which he motivates us to make transformational changes. The stories he tells offers us glimpses of ethical and religious modes of existence, and the aesthetic appeal of his writing draws us towards these lifestyles. Of course, Kierkegaard's strategies raise some moral problems. It seems kind of manipulative to use aesthetic appeals rather than reasons to get people to do things. That's what we find troubling about advertising and marketing campaigns. But I'm unsure whether this objection would bother Kierkegaard. It's true he talks about the importance of autonomy and letting people go their own way, but he also talks about deceiving people into the truth. I've written a lot about the ethics of Kierkegaard's use of deception, and I'm going to wait for another time in order to kind of apply what I've said elsewhere about that to this particular issue. And so I'll end here. Thank you very much.